Hello and welcome to this APA Live webinar, Applying for Graduate Programs in Philosophy. My name is Mike Morris. I'm the APA Deputy Director, and I will be introducing Eli Benjamin Israel of Temple University, who is the facilitator for this event.
Great, Mike, thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here. Good afternoon. So welcome to our webinar on navigating the philosophy graduate school application process. This event is co-sponsored by the APA's Graduate Student Council, from here on the GSC, and the APA Virtual Programming Committee, and is also in collaboration with the Philosophy Graduate Applicant Facebook group. So big shout out here to Shane, who is representing the group administrators. This group for me has been like a very significant resource when I was applying to grad school. So I'm very happy for this kind of collaboration. So as I said, my name is Eli. I'm a philosophy PhD student at Temple, and I'm also serving now as the GSC chair. Really happy to be facilitating the discussion. We have wonderful graduate students here as panelists. And before we dive into the specifics of how this webinar will go, I'd like to take a few minutes to say something about the APA and the GSC in particular, and how those organizations will become really valuable resources for you as you enter into grad school. So the APA is the main professional organization for philosophers in North America, perhaps in the world. And its mission is to promote philosophy as a profession within academia and also in the public sphere. As you consider philosophy grad school, you're going to encounter the APA in many crossroads, and it's going to become very relevant to you in having teaching resources, professional development resources. There's the big divisional APA conferences that are very important in our profession, and also like grant and funding opportunities, support for diversity and inclusion in the field. So I'm really happy to be part of the organization. The GSC, the Graduate Student Council, serves as the point of connection between the APA's leadership and pretty much all graduate students in philosophy, especially those situated in North America. The council was established in 2016, and it's here really to make the voices of graduate students heard, and shaping our profession. So we have 12 members in the GSC, all active graduate students from various institutions, from various research interests. I, as chair, serve as a voting member of the APA's board of officers, which means that grad students actually have a voice, like an active voice, and shape the organization's decision-making process. And once you become graduate students, there's many ways in which the GSC can be a resource for you or an address for you. So whenever you have any specific concerns that you think can be also of interest to other graduate students, the GSC can be someone to rely on and to communicate with. We organize events such as this one to support graduate students in different stages. We organize sessions at the APA meetings, and we're really striving to provide a network for graduate students to support each other. So I also encourage you to later on, when you become graduate students, to even consider making your service in the GSC. So today's webinar is going to work like this. The process of applying for grad school is messy, has a lot of different contingents. And I know how it can be confusing, perhaps even more for people from outside the US, which is my own perspective into this. And so I think that having such a forum that you can actually talk with current grad students and have their insights can be useful. For this to be fruitful as possible, most of our time today will be for Q&A, for her hearing your questions, your concerns, and providing our own completely personal advice. We're not here representing the APA, we're just representing ourselves as graduate students who would like to help you. So now we're going to do a quick round of introductions of our panelists, giving a couple of starting points for conversation, and then we're going to open the floor for questions. I hope it sounds good for all of you. And let me start with Brianna.
Hi, everybody. Super happy to be here today. My name is Brianna Larson. I'm a second-year PhD student at the University of Cincinnati. And I would say that the few things that were the most kind of important for me when I was navigating the application process a few years ago is having an outlet for all of my inevitable anxiety when I waited for the decision emails. So I'm more than happy to talk about ways to navigate that. And then also navigating how to write a statement of purpose, because at first it seems like it should be a cover letter, but that's actually not quite the case. And then trying to navigate kind of how many cooks to have in the kitchen. So there is such a thing as having too much feedback. So happy to talk more about anything related to that, research in general, and whether or not my research statement actually reflects the kind of research I do now. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Amanda?
Hi, everyone. So my name is Amanda Dubrule. I am a third-year PhD student at the University of Oregon. I applied to a PhD program directly from undergrad, so I am happy to talk about that. My cat, you might hear her. She also has thoughts. I also applied from outside of the US. I'm from Canada, so I'm also happy to talk about that aspect of it. I agree with Brianna, especially with figuring out how many places you want to apply, where you want to apply, who you want to work with. I know that was something I had to think a lot about. As well as, yeah, the terrifying aspect of having handed them in and having to wait for them. Everybody was like, that's the easiest part. You don't have to do anything anymore. And for me, that was the hardest part for sure.
Awesome, thank you. Giannis?
Hello, I am Giannis Vassilopoulos. I'm a second-year master student at Georgia State University. I am from Greece, and I applied to both MA and PhD programs. The reason that I am a master student is that I got rejected by every PhD student program. So I guess my insights into the process is how to make use of the opportunity of an MA to go out there again and apply a second time, especially from places outside of the US that are not traditionally, in somebody's mind as, places that people come in the US and do philosophy. I know of almost nobody else from Greece. So I guess this might also apply to some of you.
Awesome, thank you. And Shane?
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to be here. My name is Shane Henckel, and I'm a PhD candidate at UMass Amherst. Before that, I did my undergrad at UMass Boston, and I did a master's at Brandeis in philosophy. I've been adminning the philosophy graduate applicants group on Facebook for 6 years now. I just checked. So that's since I was an applicant myself to PhD programs. It's a role that I very much just kind of stumbled into, but it's definitely the most impactful thing that I've done in academia. The group has just about 2,000 members now. A lot of those are current grad students, and a lot are applicants or people who are thinking about applying. And yeah, I think it's just like a really valuable space to have, and it's helped a lot of people. If you found this event through other channels and you're not a member, you should definitely join the group.
Awesome, Shane. Thank you so much. And yeah, as I said, like this group have helped me a lot, especially navigating my anxiety, as Brianna was saying, when I was dealing with all like the decisions coming. So without further ado, I think we're gonna open the floor for questions. Following up on what Mike wrote in the chat, you can just raise your hand and I'll call you to unmute yourself. Another option, if you have a question that you don't feel comfortable asking in your own name and you prefer to do it anonymously, you can just send me a message, a private message on the chat, and I can ask the question for you. So great, I think we can start with Helen.
Hello, thank you first of all for like giving this talk and having the opportunity to attend to this event. I'm a master's student from Germany. I'm currently doing a semester abroad at UW in Seattle. And I was considering going into a PhD program here in the US or like in North America in general, because I'm like not super set on that, but I'm struggling with the financial side. So I'm always questioning like, how should that work with my visa? How should that work with scholarships? Do you have like any sources which I can like just inform myself to make this process a lot easier? Because I know that like sometimes you have to pay for doing a PhD and I'm not equipped with the money.
Sure, thank you so much. Does anyone in particular want to take this? Yes, Shane.
Yeah, so I do think that someone here who's an international student should speak to that aspect because that does complicate things. But in general, philosophy PhDs in the US are funded. That means that your tuition is covered, and you often get some sort of additional living stipend via teaching, usually TAing or teaching your own classes for some part of your PhD program. Now, that's not going to be like a huge amount of money. It's probably not even going to be actually a living wage because we're grad students and it's the United States. Like things are not great in any industry right now. But one thing that you can look for is some graduate student bodies at some universities are unionized, and that does help with the cost of living aspect and benefits and so on. So that's something to look at as you're deciding where to apply.
Great, thank you. Giannis, you want to add something?
Just for the visa issue, for me coming from Greece, and I guess that might be similar because we are in the EU, it was about $600 to get my visa to come. And I'm not even sure if this will be valid for the PhD or if I will have to renew it and pay another $600. But I haven't heard of any philosophy department covering that cost. So this is probably going to be, money you have to consider.
Thank you. I've got another question. Like, is there any source of data where I can like get an overview over PhD programs in philosophy?
Wait, who asked this? Was it Helen?
Yeah, sorry, it was me again.
Yeah, Brianna, go on.
Yeah, just to speak to, I think, both of your questions, Helen, which are really good questions. So I know that there's typically a spreadsheet that has all of the, or almost all of the information regarding like when applications are due, if there are waivers. And so like the waiver would be to cover your application fee because those application fees really do add up. And I know when I was applying, I applied for waivers, I think in August through September. And that was one of the only ways I was able to afford applying in the first place. So I can try to go find that spreadsheet and link it in the chat. I'll also say, while I'm not an international student, one of the things that my graduate program has done with other graduate students in our program is we've created like a handbook for incoming students that lays out these kinds of questions. And so how do I secure funding? How do I get a visa? What kinds of things do I need to do when I get here? Like, how do I create a bank account? How do I get a cell phone number? And then I know that one of our graduate students didn't have money for a flight, and they emailed our department and they were able to actually buy their flight in order to get to the United States. While that might not be the case for all universities, I think if a university accepts you and that's a barrier to getting there, it never hurts to reach out and ask.
Exactly. No, I think that's a very good point. And for myself, I didn't ask. I had to pay it off my own resources. And then afterwards, one of my professors said, well, you should have asked. We might have been able to do it for you at that time. So I would definitely encourage you guys to, after there's decisions, after they actually want you, then just like asking for more never hurts. And I'd also like to add something. So I had a slightly different experience from Giannis in terms of like the visa. So I'm here on a J1 visa. And that's a visa that is usually more applied for postdocs. Most people on PhD programs get an F visa. For myself, it was important because I came here with my family, I have a wife, and we also wanted for her to have the opportunity to work in the US. So those are things to be aware of. Asking the university. It's good to inquire in the university's website. There's usually a link also for the international office, usually called the ISSS. And so you can have like some specific information that applies to the universities that you are applying. So in my case, I had 2 offers. One of the places were not even willing to talk about a J visa, and my institution was completely open for it. So yeah, it's good to be aware of those things. And I did not have to pay for my visa, but that might be, I think, with the fact that I came for a PhD program or the fact that I came from another country. So I think that what my different experience from Giannis shows that these things very much vary, and so you should just look case by case. Okay, I think we can go for the next question.
Can I quickly add something? Sorry.
Yeah.
I just want to second the thing Shane said about unions. I know at the University of Oregon, the union will cover SEVIS and sometimes visa fees. So that's something to really look into. As well as I would look in to see if there's any governmental resources in Germany where you're from. I know for Canada, they have a grant that helped me pay, as well as, like Ellie said, asking your department. I know of another person who was able to get relocation fees, because I know an international move is incredibly expensive. The other thing I would consider, because you said North America broadly, in Canada, you're able to work a limited amount of hours outside of the university. In the US, you cannot work off campus except for, very limited circumstances. So that is also something to consider.
Great, thank you. Let's proceed to the next questions. I'll get to you in a second. I just have a few questions on the chat that I want to address first. So first, Sina is asking if we can explain the difference between official and unofficial transcripts. Some universities that I would like to apply require official transcripts. From my experience, unofficial transcripts can be just what you have like in your personal portal in the university website. You just print that and you upload the PDF version. Official transcripts usually have to be sent directly from the university and be signed by them. So it's a little bit more complicated in this way. Do you guys have anything to add on this, or I can proceed to the next question? Okay, another question is going off Helen's question. I heard teaching assistantships have a different application deadline. For example, applying earlier than the regular PhD deadline. Are there resources where I can look into that?
As far as I know, it will vary depending on the program and department you're in. For example, I mean, at the University of Oregon, we're guaranteed as PhD students funding, and that's through a guaranteed TA-ship. Generally speaking, those applications are usually internal, and they happen once you've been accepted.
Exactly.
Yeah, the same thing happens at Cincinnati. So when you first come into the program, unless you're offered an external kind of fellowship, like a presidential fellowship, for instance, which I don't think you apply into here, the department has to nominate you for it. Everyone is just kind of guaranteed the same GA-ship. And then the following year, there are multiple kind of other avenues to get your funding, and you just kind of throw your name in the hat for it, you apply for it. And then it's either the case that you'll be like a fellow with a specific organization, and so then you don't have to TA, or you get to teach your own class, or you're a regular TA. And for the most part, at least where I'm at, all of those tend to come with around the same amount of funding. But like they mentioned, those applications are internal.
Great, thank you. Theo, do you want to unmute yourself and just ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So hi, I'm an undergraduate student from Canada. And my question was basically, Brianna, you touched on it a bit about how the statement of purpose is not really a cover letter. Could you speak to what makes a successful statement of purpose?
I can sure try. Yeah, so like when I was applying into programs, I was coming straight from undergrad. So I applied to a mix of master's programs and PhD programs. And I was also a non-traditional student in that right now I have 12 years of work experience in industry before coming into academia. So I was very used to kind of doing the classic, like, I'm going to beg you for this job and explain why you should give it to me. And so a statement of purpose is a little bit different in that you want it to be really forward looking. And so you want to be using the kinds of things that you've done, like maybe in undergrad, if you did like an independent study, if you were in an honors program, if you maybe presented your research in your department, or you did it at an undergrad conference, or like maybe you had a capstone project. You'll kind of want to take all of what you've already done, but mostly write about the kinds of things that you want to do in the future. And so in that sense, you can tailor each statement of purpose to the specific university that you're applying to. Whether or not you want to do that depends on how many programs you plan on applying to. I, for instance, applied to 18 programs. And I think I got into 3 and I got waitlisted at 1. And so I view that as like, I view that as a win. However, I also tried to specifically tailor each statement of purpose to the strengths of the department. Given how many people apply, that might go well for you or it might not. Application processes are just so, they're so kind of like unknown. Like there are so many variables that it's really hard to say that like having a great statement purpose is like the way in, because ultimately that might not be the case. So just to kind of like summarize what I've said, because I feel like I'm kind of rambling right now, just make sure it's like forward focused in the future, and also know that like what you write in your statement of purpose, your department isn't going to hold you to that. If you get into your department, you get into your coursework and you decide like, oh, I'm actually not interested in like the neuroscientific foundations of consciousness. I'm actually really like interested in like feminist takes in the philosophy of science. Like they're not going to prevent you from doing that. Your statement of purpose is just a way to show that like you have thought about the kind of research that you want to do in the future, and you have kind of a coherent narrative that helps the department really like understand what you're about.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yes, Giannis?
One thought I had listening to Brianna is that because my undergrad was philosophy of science only, and I wanted to do social philosophy and feminist philosophy, but we had no classes like that in my undergrad. When I applied out the first time, my statement of purpose was forward-looking, but if somebody saw my transcript, they wouldn't get how that person could be, you know, do suddenly a complete turn to feminist philosophy with no foundations. So I would try to keep that in mind when being forward-looking. Try to link that back to what you have done already, because otherwise it will sound like you don't have a foundation to actually do that.
Great. And Maya, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, just briefly, also building off of what Brianna and Giannis has said, also while you're looking forward, while you present yourself as forward looking, you don't also want to present yourself as so cemented in a project that there's no room for growth or change. I know a lot of my statement purposes, for better or worse, were mostly question leaning. These are questions I have about these areas. This is the experience I have with it, and these are the gaps that I want to fill. And this is why I think this department would allow for that.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, guys.
So let's proceed now to a few questions from the chat, and then we go back to the people raising hands. So Alina is asking how important is GRE in the application process? Since a lot of universities are doing GRE optional, I was confused if the applicants normally apply with GRE. Anyone wants to step in? Yeah, Shane.
Yeah, so obviously I applied when the GRE was still required across the board pretty much. There's maybe one or two that didn't, but now it's, I think, becoming very common for them not to require it, to either make it optional or just not accepted. I will say if it's optional, don't submit it. It won't help you. They won't look at it. They don't care. It doesn't have anything to do with your like ability to do philosophy or do a philosophy PhD. And no admissions committee in philosophy thinks that it does. It's just noise for them. It's not like, doesn't tell them anything about you as a candidate. If there are like some schools that like require it and others that don't, like personally, I would go out of my way to not apply to the ones that do. Because when you're applying to grad school, like the GRE takes up so much time, so much effort, and so much money. Like between the actual testing fees, test prep, and then the score reports, it's like hundreds and hundreds of dollars. And that's not trivial. And you are better off spending your time on your sample, because that is what committees are going to look at, and that's what is going to tell them like that you're a good philosopher.
Great, thank you. I may add something here very quick. I might be mistaken here, but I think that if you already did a GRE and you have like an amazing score, so go for it if that's an option. But otherwise, it seems to be the kind of things that can only hurt you, especially if the program is not making that required. I can tell you that my program still requires GRE, and I think that's unnecessary. Perhaps there are also a few others in there, but then in this case, perhaps you should, or if that's a program that is very important for you, you can just email the DGS and ask if you can apply without it, and they may be open to it if your record is good enough besides it. Okay, Diego?
Hi, everyone. Thanks for holding this event. It's really great. I've already learned a lot, so I really appreciate you guys. My question is actually for Giannis or for Brianna as well, because I know you also applied to MA programs. So I know there isn't a lot of information out there, MA-wise. One of the schools I'm looking at is like Georgia State University. They have really good strengths in history of philosophy. University of Milwaukee, for instance. But there isn't like a lot of information out there. And I think the pool of terminal MA programs is also much smaller. So I was just curious if you guys had any advice on doing research there. I'm only considering applying to MA. So yeah, thank you.
Shane might also have some things to say. So if you are into like Hegel, Kant, Nietzsche, and like do that kind of history of philosophy, or if you are into ancient philosophy, Georgia State would be a good place to go for an MA. Do you have questions about how they like if these are indeed strong in those areas, or okay, so you seem to respond positively to that. Yeah, it is a good place to go. If you would you have additional questions to like how DMA works, or is it about whether they're actually strong in those areas?
I guess it's whether or not they're actually strong in those areas. You know, they have like placement records listed. But I guess I just feel like the pool of schools that I'm applying to is maybe like 3 or 4. And so I feel like maybe I should broaden my horizon, but I don't actually know where to really go for that information. Because there isn't a lot of information on the MA programs in general.
Yeah, so there is a list of funded MA programs that you can look at, and there are a lot. Like it's not just only 3 or 4. There might be 20 or something. So you could do that. People will have more to say.
That's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, so in general, the kind of advice that I was given, and I think this advice was tailored to me specifically because like I didn't want to take out any more student loans, and 2, like I didn't have the money to pay for a degree. So I was strongly advised to only apply to programs that have funding, even if they're only master's programs. That being said, I know that those programs tend to get a lot more applications. So if you're in the kind of place where your either employer will pay for a portion of your school, you're independently wealthy, or you don't really care about student loans, I would say go ahead and apply to as many master's programs as there are. That being said, off the top of my head, I think Georgia State, Simon Fraser, Eastern Michigan, those are the 3 that come to mind when I think of like funded masters. And I know that Eastern Michigan, at least I think, is on the rise in terms of like having a pretty good climate. That being said, like I can't advocate for that because I am not there, and I'm also not here to promote schools in general. But those are just kind of schools that like when I think about a funded master's program, those are the ones I can recall.
Yes, Shane.
Yeah, I just want to add about the sort of competitiveness of MA programs that I think that overall, yeah, there are less people applying to MAs than PhDs, and it's more likely that if you are qualified, you will get accepted. To compare, like with the top ranked PhD programs, you have 200, 300, 400 applicants competing for like 2 to 6 spots usually. So that's like a very, very small percentage are going to get accepted, even if like more than that are actually qualified for the program. That being said, as Brianna was saying, there's like less funding available usually for MA programs. There are some that are fully funded, but usually that just means the tuition is covered. You would still be responsible for cost of living. So that's like definitely a huge consideration. And yeah, I mean, even if, so like when I was at Brandeis, I think about half of the tuition was covered, and like that's including the TA ship. The TA ship was like abysmally paid. And then like the cost of living in the Boston area is just like so high. So I ended up with a ton of student debt from my master's. And I don't recommend going to debt for a master's, but if you're like committed to academic philosophy, then that might be the best track for you.
Okay, Giannis, yeah.
Just very quickly, like for Georgia State specifically, you do have a stipend and it's advertised around $11,000, but after you get in, you realize that you have to pay for your mandatory insurance, which might be like up to $2,000 a year, and student fees that are up to another $1,500 a year. So like the actual stipend you get is much less. And like $8,000 is not enough money to live in the US for the whole year. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, I'll ask some questions from the chat and then go back to the to Tejas. So one question here is, how many programs should we apply to? Big question. Does anyone have like a general enough insight into this? Yes, Shane and Amanda.
Yeah, I can speak to this because this is a question we get like all the time in the Facebook group. That so when I applied to 26 PhD programs and also 9 law schools because I need a backup plan. That is absolutely overkill. Don't do that. It was so much money and so much time. And I will also say my list was very top heavy in terms of the PGR rankings. I was applying to analytic programs. And I applied to basically all of the top 10 schools, or like most of them. And then most of the rest of the schools I applied to were in like the top 30. So having just sort of observed this group for the past 6 years, my general recommendation is apply to 10 to 15. This is for PhD programs specifically. So 10 to 15 PhD programs, and make that list very tailored. So don't just go by ranking, go by fit and area. Make sure that you're like doing a lot of research into which schools you're applying to, and not just kind of applying to all of them and trying to get into one. Because that's what really matters, is whether it's a good fit. So you can apply to the top 10 schools, but if you're not working in an area that anyone there works on, then you're just not even going to really be considered. So it's just kind of a waste of time to apply. So yeah, like 10 to 15 would be my recommendation.
Thank you. Amanda?
I'll just be quick. I think it really depends on like what area you're interested in as well. For example, I'm really interested in American philosophy, and there are not very many schools that focus on that. And I'm also interested in feminist philosophy. There's significantly more. But I am kind of an outlier. I applied to 4 schools, 2 MAs, and 2 direct entry PhDs. I think it'll depend on how much money you have for the application fees. That really does add up, as I think Brianna said earlier. I didn't know about the, like, you could ask for waivers, so that can also help expand the amount that you can apply to. But yeah, I would consider, where do you want to live? That can affect the number of places you apply to. Who do you want to work with? And at that department, how many people could you work with? For example, if there was only one person I could work with at the department, I ended up just scrapping it. And then again, how much can you afford to apply to, and what would be the moving costs if you even were to get into that program? That's what I used to determine where and how many places I applied to, which ended up really limiting the scope.
That's very good. Yes, Brianna?
Yeah, one last thing really quickly is I would maybe have a conversation with whoever your letter writers are going to be, and let them know what schools you're planning on applying to, because they're going to have a much better idea about, like, kind of like insider knowledge about if that department would be a good fit for you in the event that they either have friends who went there or friends who maybe work there. And like also what the strengths of the department are. Philosophy seems like it's a really big world, but it's really not. And so the longer that you're kind of in the field, the more you start to know about either schools or about like individual programs or about where to go for what your interests are. So like the institution that I'm at right now wasn't even on my radar. And when my mentor brought it up, I like laughed because I was like, Ohio, seriously? But actually, I think it's the best possible fit for me out of any of the schools that I applied to, including like my dream school. I also agree with Shane. My list was incredibly top heavy. And I would say as much as you can, don't pay attention to the lighter report. If you don't know what that is, don't even Google it. Just look at the strengths of the schools based on what they say on their websites. And if you relate, apply that way.
Well, Brianna, we know that everyone is Googling right now the LiDAR report. Okay, good. Thank you. I think we're gonna limit like 2 people responding for each thing, just so that we can address as much people as possible. So I have another question here, and then we're gonna go to Tejas. So hi Ellie, thank you for hosting this meeting. I have a background in philosophy as an undergraduate, but earned my master's in education. My plan for the SLP is to talk about my recent experiences more since these are more updated, and I wanted to know if you think my diverse academic background might be a disadvantage in the application process, since my master's is offered from the School of Education. Anyone wants to step into this? Yes, Shane.
Yeah, so if you're applying from a field other than philosophy and you like have no or very few philosophy classes under your belt, it's gonna be hard to get into a PhD program because they want to see some like foundation and training, and that's not usually something that you can just kind of do on your own. So if you're just applying out of some other field, I would recommend applying to master's programs because they are going to give you that additional training in philosophy if you're planning to do a PhD in the long term. But yes, I would definitely talk about that in the statement of purpose. You want to sort of say, like, here's what the academic training that I do have has taught me about philosophy and what I'm going to bring to the table as a philosopher. And like, here's what I'm going to do to like get trained in philosophy. And just like talk about what your interests are, how that's been informed by your training so far in education in your case. If you do have like if you had a philosophy minor or like a bunch of philosophy classes in undergrad, that would probably be sufficient. But they just want to see that you have some like formal training, I think, for PhDs.
Yeah, and I also would like to add that if I understand correctly, they have an undergraduate in philosophy, but a master's in education. If that's the case, then a bunch of people, including Amanda here, apply directly from undergrad. So I think that actually having a master's from another field, but perhaps your writing was philosophical oriented, that's something to highlight, and that can be actually useful, especially if the kind of philosophy that you intend to do is also has to do with the field of education, I think. Okay, let's go to the next question. So Tejas or Tejas, I'm sorry for not pronouncing your name correctly.
Oh yeah, it's Tejas. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, thanks for holding the meeting. I'm a first year's master's student at NIU. So my question is about the writing sample. So I feel that the sample which I'm coming up with seems to be very specific and technical. So I'm not sure if a broad range of philosophers read the writing sample when they look at your application, or is it just the philosopher who sort of specializes in what you're writing? Because I think what I'm going to write would be sort of understandable easily to just someone who already knows the area well. So I'm not sure if I should make it more sort of easily accessible and hence less technical, so it's only 25-page limit, so I need to compromise somewhere on the depth if I want to make it broad, so I'm not sure what I should do. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Okay, yes, let's start from Panelist then.
So I would consider the fact that you don't necessarily know who's going to be initially reading your application material. And so I would still keep it technical. I don't think that's like a bad way to go about it, but I would ensure that a broader audience can at least understand what your project is and what the purpose of that paper is. Because it might not directly go to the person, say, that you would want to work with initially that would understand as well that same material. For example, I mean, I also had a couple different writing samples that I used for the different programs I was applying to that were tailored broadly to what they were, but they would still be accessible to others in that faculty who didn't necessarily study that content.
Great, thank you. Shane, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was gonna say pretty much the same thing, that you want to make sure it's accessible, because different programs do their admissions processes completely differently, and it's kind of a black box. So you don't know who's going to be reading it, if it's going to be someone who specializes in that area, or someone on the admissions committee, or just like whoever's around and available. So I think that technical is good because you want to show them that you're proficient in that area. But you definitely want to make sure that someone with like generalist philosophy training can understand what you're saying.
Great. So I have a question here in the chat. What are the most important things you cover when you are emailing, reaching out to a professor who is in the field that you're interested in? I'm not sure if that's I know that like in UK schools, for example, you're expected to reach out to the professors before you apply. I don't think that's the case in most places in the US. I mean, of course, you can just like reach out if you have like a specific question about their research, but it's not a practice to talk to them in advance about applications, I think. But yes, Brianna?
Yeah, just briefly, I would say before you email them, ask yourself why you're emailing them. If you're emailing them just for the sake of having like a point of contact, professors can get up to hundreds of emails per day. And so you'll want to have a good reason to be emailing them. But I would say that it's definitely not required that you email one professor from each US institution. Because like at the end of the day, the admissions process should happen without your name tied to things like your writing sample. And so it's not really going to matter much anyway, for the most part.
Yes. Amanda, you'd like to add anything?
Yeah, I'm mostly the same as Brianna, but yeah, just to say, like, if there are specific questions you have, say for a professor you would want to work with, typically it wouldn't be something like, are you accepting students? I just found that that's not a thing that happens in the US. But if you have questions you want to discuss about their research that is relevant to what you do, that's fine. But yeah, not just a general reaching out.
Perhaps the only exception to that, I mean, I had cases that I wanted to apply to places to work with specific people that I knew by their age that they might be retiring sometime soon. So in these cases, it might be a good idea to ask if they're accepting students because they might have other plans. And from my experience, they usually are pretty open about this. Okay. So again, if people want just to come in and ask the question themselves, you can raise their hands, but I have a few here on queue from the chat. So would you mind walking us briefly through what is on the grad school application and what part you found the most difficult? Does anyone want to do a quick debrief? I think that's, yes, Brianna.
Yeah, so if like you're asking in general, like what materials you'll specifically need, you're gonna need a writing sample, a statement of purpose, and then I think at least 3 letters of recommendation. You personally won't submit those. Your professors will get a link to the portal where they will upload their own letter of recommendation. Ideally, these would be at like there would at least be maybe one professor that you have like a pretty close relationship with. You've done at least 1 to 2 classes with them. Maybe you got an A or an A minus on either in their class or on the final paper. And so really your letter writers should be able to speak to your kind of ability and your capacity to kind of do philosophy in general, kind of how you are as a student. And so like though like the only things that you'll really have much control over though at this stage, if you're applying like right now, are going to be your writing sample and your statement of purpose. If say you're a freshman, you're a sophomore, even a junior, I would highly recommend getting involved with the life of your department as much as you can and kind of show that you have a commitment to the profession even as an undergrad. So if there's like an undergrad philosophy club, I would highly recommend getting involved there. That being said, I think for me, the hardest aspect of the application process was really just the anxiety. And the way that I dealt with that is I started running, which was really helpful. So I will hand it off to anyone else though that would like to speak on this.
I just would like to say that one technical thing that I think is very much important is for you to open the portals, the application portals for other programs that you want to apply to very much in advance so that you can be aware of what's exactly the process, what's exactly required from you, if there's any options for waivers. All those things many times only become salient to you once you enter the portal. So yeah, and I would say that like the most I think that the most important document is definitely the writing sample, but we all should at least know how a paper looks like. We don't necessarily know how a statement of purpose looks like or a diversity statement looks like. And so sometimes those statements actually are more difficult to write in the sense that you're not even sure if you're in the right direction. Yes, Giannis.
On that point, people are generally very strict about word limits. So they would say that nothing above 15 pages or something like that. And I've seen cases of people, like I know somebody who got into a lot of programs last year, had a writing sample that was almost 12,000 words. So sometimes that doesn't apply the same way. So, and I've seen a lot of people, a lot of my friends that have gotten into like top programs and they have been willing to share their like statement of purpose with me. It was usually 2 full single-spaced pages, and that was totally against the requirements listed on the websites of those programs. So perhaps it appears that in some cases what matters is if you're like very passionate about something and very good at doing that and you have things to say, perhaps they will appreciate that even if it goes beyond what they state on their programs officially to require.
Great, thank you. So Muhammad is asking if the Q&A is going to be available for later. Our last webinar of this sort from the spring became available also on YouTube. So I think it will be the case also for this one. Let's see what else we have here. Okay, so I might have missed the quote. I might have missed this part, and I'm sorry if this question has already been asked. For context, I graduated in May with my undergrad in philosophy and did research with a professor in undergrad. I'm looking at applying to non-terminal masters so that I can get into a PhD program with more experience and classes on my back. That being said, I know who I want to write sample on, what I want to write my writing sample on, and I know that it needs work, effort, and different literature being pulled. I know that I need to start on my application soon, but I can't help but feel that I've been put my application on the back burner. Any specific advice for getting started on my writing sample? Yes, Amanda.
Use something you already have written. Now that could be the research you've done with a professor, a class that was especially pertinent to the area you want to continue studying in. But given that most applications are due, December, January, to really get a writing sample polished, I would focus on editing something you already have, maybe reaching out to former professors if you can, to have them give you further feedback on your edited version of something you have. But I would focus more on, just polishing something you have instead of trying to write something completely new.
Great, thank you. I think we have to wrap up as we're completing our hour. I'm sorry if I didn't get to all questions. I see that there's 2 more questions that we're not able to address. So I'm sorry for this, but I hope that this webinar was still useful for many of you. I can say that if you have any questions that I can answer, I'm happy for you guys to email me directly. I'm sure that's the case also for the rest of the panelists. Yeah, I'm getting a thumbs up, so it's good. So feel free to email us and also join the Facebook group. That's a great resource. And then you have a bunch of people besides us also to answer your questions. I want to thank again the APA, thank Mike and all our panelists for taking part of this. And good luck, everyone, in the application cycle.
Right. Thank you, everyone, for attending this APA Live webinar. This will be posted on the website within the next few business days. We hope that you'll return to attend future APA Live webinars. Thank you to all of the panelists and for everybody who attended today. Have a good weekend, everyone.